escaped from the British, and he continued to fight through the end of the war. He and I are very close. At times we will enjoy supper together, and at that time we will speak of all manner of topic. And I should tell you by way of explanation that Mr. Isaac Franks is a child of the stock of Abraham. He is a Hebrew, and we were enjoying a dinner this about a year ago, almost a year, summertime last, and we were having our second bottle of Madeira wine. He taught me a word that he says appears perhaps more than almost any other word in the Hebrew Bible, the 5 books of Moses. And I don't pretend to speak the tongue of the ancient Israelites, but he did teach me this one word, again, after almost 2 bottles of Madeira wine. and the word was Zachor. And in its meanings in the Bible, it has many iterations, but it means hold close, it means never, well, it means guard well, it means hold close to your heart, it means never forget. But its primary meaning, as it appears more than almost any other word in the Bible, is to remember. To remember. You are here because you are remembering a long string of young men and young ladies who go back to, well, the stock of Abraham. And that is what we are celebrating this day. With a little more grace and understanding, I want to make you aware of one gentleman who served me, a Hebrew gentleman. His name was David Salisbury Franks. Anyone have heard of Mr. Franks? None of you. Mr. Franks was born in Philadelphia. His family moved, I can't imagine why, they moved up to Canada. Now, Mr. Franks was residing in Montreal at a time when one of his friends was criticizing the King of England. He actually compared the King of England to the Pope. That's not something that you do to the King of England, if you know your history. So he was put in jail, and David Salisbury Franks fought for him, was very upset, protested. He ended up in jail as well. And Franks was in jail for 6 months, and it was at that time that he began to formulate his thoughts about the crown, about tyranny, and about the beauty of freedom, freedom from slavery, if you will, liberty. And so he came out of jail and he worked with a colonel at the time. His name was Colonel Benedict Arnold, who was trying to capture Canada, and he failed. But Franks would reach into his own pocket to pay the army. He ultimately moved back to Philadelphia in July of 1776. Very interesting time to be in Philadelphia. He becomes a member of the Continental Army, and because now General Benedict Arnold knew him and of his work, he brought him in as an aide. Are you familiar with the rather nefarious treason that Benedict Arnold was convicted of? And so, so Arnold's 2 aides, a fellow by the name of Varick and David Salisbury Franks, were guilty by implication. And they were investigated, court-martialed, and exonerated. No evidence against them whatsoever. But for whatever reason you may use in your imagination, and I have my own beliefs on the subject, Franks kept being persecuted by people. And he came to me and he said, General Washington, I would like a second court-martial with full investigation. Please, sir, I need to clear my name. And I granted that. A major 1-month investigation occurred. He was found absolutely guilt-free, absolutely innocent. But the whispering campaign continued. I suggested, after I took him into my military family as an aide-de-camp, that he ultimately leave the army, and he joined the diplomatic corps, ultimately working under Mr. Jefferson. His problems continued. They did not go away. He sought counsel with me. I suggested that he take a pension given by the Congress and retire in peace, because you can only hit your head against a wall for so long. And he did that. Unfortunately, ultimately he became penniless, and David Salisbury Franks in the smallpox epidemic of 1793 in Philadelphia, died. He was on a pauper's wagon, being led to a pauper's grave, when his body was recognized by a Christian friend of his. On the wagon, stopped the wagon, had the body removed, and David Salisbury Franks was buried with honors in the church graveyard of Christ's Church in Philadelphia City. It was just a few years ago in your day, in the year 2009, that members of Christ's Church and members of Mikveh Israel Synagogue, the oldest congregation in Philadelphia City, came together at the graveside of Major David Salisbury Franks and recited together, shoulder to shoulder, Jew and Christian, the Jewish prayer for the dead over his grave. I tell you that story because he contributed greatly to our cause. In fact, people of the Hebrew persuasion contributed well beyond their numbers in terms of the proportion to our independence and liberty. And it's not much of a stretch to understand why. Not since Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. They have always been concerned with slavery and the great gifts given by divine providence of liberty and freedom. So if you understand that my desire to tell this story, I hope it was worthwhile and not of too much trouble. And so I actually hand this program for the moment back to the real general.
Well done, Joe. Well, we really have to keep him around the house.
I think we had passed around wine, some champagne to do a toast to Reagan. Reaganita! To Reagan.
You know, that was terrible. You need to do it in the 18th century style. I'm going to call the cheer, and you will 3 times shout, "Huzzah!" which means to her honor. Are you ready?
Yes.
To the young lady of the day, Reagan. Hip hip! Huzzah! Hip hip! Huzzah! Hip hip! Huzzah! That's the way to do it.
Yeah. Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming today from Canada and New York and wherever else. Boston. Wherever else people came. Maryland. DC.
Just about 300 yards away.
Alexandria. And I just want to say that, you know, a few years ago, Reagan had some issues that, No. The day after she was diagnosed, Dr. Greenberg, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, told us that we were going to dance at her bar mitzvah.
Yes.
And, well, we'll see if the band is good enough. We'll have a dance or two. But I just want to say, like, we're talking about, Melissa and I were talking about some of Reagan's qualities and her love of history and Broadway and history and Broadway. And, you know, she's gone through a lot of iterations in her political views. When she first got sick, it's one of my favorite stories because she was still a Republican back then. They had put in a tube in her chest so they could draw blood and give her chemo and stuff. And the first time the nurses were trying to clean it out, she was fighting and screaming. She was 3 years old. And I said, Reagan, tell the nurses what political party you are. And she immediately stops and she says, me and Gaddy and Audrey and President Bush are Republicans. and Mummy and our dog Madison and our cat Dennis are Democrats. And the nurses just burst out laughing. She was totally calm after that. They did what they had to do, and that's when she was Republican. Then later on, she would tell me in 2008 that she really wanted Hillary Clinton to become president because we needed a woman to be president, and she would tell me other things like, that her husband was also president, and I'd be like, no, that's impossible. She'd be like, no, it's true, Daddy. Really, it's true. And now, having been learned a little bit more in school, she's now to the left of Trotsky. Melissa's influences, but one of her best qualities, and I think it's genetic from me, but Melissa might dispute it, is she has an unbelievable sense of empathy. that kids or people who are in trouble, she is willing to help. And when her bat mitzvah came and we suggested that she consider not getting gifts, and she immediately said all her gifts have to go to kids at High Life Life because they suffered the way she did. And I just thought that was very, very nice. So, and when she comes across people who are in trouble, just either her friends or people even on the street, she immediately is not embarrassed by approaching them, and she's willing to try and help them. And it's really a wonderful thing that she clearly inherited from me. This is one caring for humanity.
No me.
So anyways, I just want to say to Reagan and L'chaim. And now we'll do the candles. And now one of the traditions that people have bar mitzvahs is they invite people up to light candles.
Did Audrey